Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Deserts of Plenty. My name is Ralph. Deserts of Plenty is a podcast where I try to make sense of a seemingly crazy world. A world in which, it turns out that maybe aliens are now real. Not only are they real, but they've been visiting us for a long time. And people high within the U.S. government are saying, yeah, it's a cover up. And not only that, but human beings have been interacted with these creatures and that people have died as a result of interacting with these creatures. Is that true? I mean, it's like there's certainly a lot of conspiracy theories. The other one that's gaining a lot of traction is the JFK assassination. With the rise of RFK and his presidential run, he firmly believes that the U.S. government was involved and well, yeah, that's it. It's like the ability to decipher fact from fiction is becoming increasingly more difficult. The more we read, the less we know. And that's, I assume, has a lot to do with the internet and maybe with how we live today. Anyway, that's what this podcast is about. And so I like to talk about things I find interesting, that you may also find interesting. So I invite you to come along with this ride, a short little bites about interesting topics. So today, I wanted to talk about stories. Now, when I was a kid, every time I hate saying that phrase because every time I start saying that, I'd be like, here goes the eye rolls. It's not like how things are different back then. It's not that. It's just as a child, I was fascinated with space. I think like many children of my generation, I mean, I was born just before the moon landing, if it ever really happened. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was filmed by Stanley Kubrick. I don't think so. I think we went to the moon. Anyway, that doesn't matter. My opinion is irrelevant in that matter. But I was fascinated with space, and so I was a big fan in my, I guess, early teens when the shuttle program was announced and was launched. And those first shuttle launches were amazing. And I know I came in or got in front of a TV and watched them take off these huge things. Anyway, somebody asked the question, and I can't remember where this came from. The one of the hallmarks or one of the most identifiable features of the old shuttles were the three solid solid fuel boosters. And the question was asked, how is the size of those three black funnels, I guess? How are they? What determines how big they are? Is it, how much thrust? Is it blah, 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 blah? And it turns out, no, those, since they had to travel by train, the size of the solid rooster, it's a portmanteau of rocket booster, a rooster. I didn't know that until now. Oh, well, it's cool. Good to know. The roosters, the solid fuel rocket boosters, were confined to their space by how that was the widest thing you could put on a train. And that had to do with the gauge of the track, because the gauge of the track determined how far apart they were. So two trains traveling side by side, I think was part of the reason. But anyway, the size of these things were limited by how big of something you could put on a train. You can Google it and see it yourself. And what determined the gauge of the track? Well, that is an old measurement. It's not an even thing. It's based on the width of chariot wheels. Oh, okay. Well, what was that based on? Well, the width of a chariot wheel was based on the horse in front of it and how wide that had to be to accommodate behind a horse. So when you boiled this all down, the size of the cones on the roosters, right? The solid rocket booster funnels on the space shuttle had to do with the size of a horse's ass. That's the story. And if you Google it, you can read about it, and it's there. I promise. Now that's a interesting story. It's fascinating. It captures your imagination, and it makes sense, and it's logical, and all that. But it's completely bogus. It's not true. It's completely fake. Similarly, there's another story that is less known. I mean, I don't know that first one's known at all, but the second one is also interesting. And that is in the early days of firefighting in cities. And I think this goes back to the early 19th century in Britain with the first fire brigades, like fire stations. And they were created and assembled by basically very rich people who owned buildings in London. And so they funded fire departments, quote unquote, that basically served those buildings alone. They didn't go off, to do random house fires, or, somebody is making fries. Not that they haven't, making fries in oil, but you know what I mean? The house fires they didn't really attend to. They were there dedicated for these buildings. And the story was that these fire brigades would go out, and, the building had to have a little, like a plaque on it saying insured by whomever. And only then would they fight the fire. And there were reports of these firefighters standing around watching buildings burn to the ground because they were not insured. Again, an interesting story, makes a lot of sense, completely made up. In fact, it's the opposite. These firefighters would go out, and if a building close to one that was insured was on fire, they'd put it out so that the building that was insured would not catch fire, right? And then you're like, oh, that makes so much more sense. So these are two stories that still persist. You can actually find them on the internet, and a lot of people believe they're true. A third example, because I think this one is more recent, and it really captures the idea about this one more time. During the presidential race of 2016, the Republican, head-to-head, try to find a candidate. During one of the debates, someone asked Herman Cain, who is deceased now, but at the time, I believe was a neurosurgeon. He was a doctor anyway. And they asked him if vaccines cause autism. And his response was detailed, and it was based on the science. And he said there is as yet no evidence whatsoever that vaccines cause autism or have any negative impacts whatsoever. And in fact, have saved countless lives. And then they asked candidate Trump what he thought. And candidate Trump, he just said, well, I have a friend, and had a baby boy. Beautiful, beautiful baby boy. Beautiful. The best baby you've ever seen. I can't do a Trump impression to save my life. But I try to approximate one there. And then, and he said, he went on to say that, he got his vaccination, and then shortly after he developed autism, and then I think Trump went on to say something about how, it's a lot of stuff to put in a baby's arm. And so while he didn't say, yes, it does, he created a story. And that story has so much more power than reality or facts. On social media, a story that is negative, that is false, but is very negative, creates fear or anger, will spread way faster than the truth that comes out afterwards. And so I just want to point out and say, be careful of stories, and don't necessarily believe they are true, especially when those stories confirm something you believe. Another one that happened to me, I was talking about J.K. Rowling, who is has become a divisive figure. And this person pointed out to me that J.K. Rowling was anti-Semitic. And to which I said, well, I'd heard the criticisms of her and her anti-trans stance, but I had not heard, or actually, that's not true. I did hear about the anti-Semitic accusations, and that was based on Jon Stewart on a podcast made a joke about how the goblins in the movie resemble stereotypical recounts of Jews from ancient, or well, maybe not ancient, but from a while ago. Stereotypical derogatory depictions of Jewish people, and he laughed, and he was making a joke about it, and said, "Oh yes, clearly she's very anti-Semitic," or something to that effect. Anyway, one news organization, and I can't remember if it was Newsweek or which one, picked up the story and said Jon Stewart calls J.K. Rowling anti-Semitic, and then on a subsequent podcast, Jon Stewart took this news organization to task for, he said, your journalistic business is fire. And he was very, as upset as Jon Stewart gets, but he was very pointed in his criticism of news media for taking something that was clearly a joke and writing something so that they could get a lot of clicks for it, right? Because that's what matters. It's not accuracy, it's not honesty, it's just clicks. Who can get the most clicks? When it comes to news organizations, especially corporate-backed news organizations that are only interested in the bottom line because they are corporations and that's their raison d'etre. Anyway, so this person who's close to me believed that without question because they have a dim view of J.K. Rowling because of her anti-trans stance and are therefore predisposed to believe things that confirm their bias, like we all are. If you are reading a newspaper article and it says coffee drinkers live longer than non-coffee drinkers, and you drink coffee, you're apt to believe that. Oh, that's good. Good to hear. You like that story. Meanwhile, if you don't drink coffee, you're more likely to take a dim view of it. And it doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. But that's the power of stories. And then I just want to leave you with this little thing. It's like, well, what are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, right? I'm always unlucky, right? And then if you tell yourself the story of I'm always unlucky, and you think every time you drive down the street, you'll hit every red light, you will. If you tell yourself the story that I'm very lucky, and you drive down the street thinking you'll hit every green light, you will. In truth, you'll hit the same number of red lights and green lights as everyone else, but you will more likely remember the ones that confirm your bias and the story that you have told yourself. So be wary of the stories you tell yourself. And in a subsequent podcast, I will talk about this, but thinking about the opposite. Or how do I know that's true? Well, what if I'm wrong about the stories we tell ourselves, whether it's about ourselves, about the things that we hold true? I think it's a really interesting exercise. And if you have trouble doing it, there's an interesting question in there too. Anyway, that's my time for today. I hope you have a great week, everybody. And we'll see you back here again for more Deserts of Plenty. My name's Ralph. Please leave me a comment or send me a note. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear what you think. All right, take care. Bye.